To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe. Let's run the show.
Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a best-selling novel and inspire you to finish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark Devoe, and we'd just like to welcome you to this incredible episode, this live episode, live on the Tinternet. But before we dive in, we would like to thank our sponsor, Scrivener, who have created a piece of software. It's Scrivener, actually, is the name of the software. It's Literature and Latte is the wonderful company. And we would like to offer our readers an incredible 10, 20% off. In fact, it's going up all the time. 20% off, which works out, Mr. Stay, we actually worked out the other day, works out to $36, which is like, for a piece of software, it's not even a recurring payment. What are they thinking? $36 with the discount to get Scrivener. And it is literally the best writing app on the planet. And we're not going to stop saying it until everyone in the world who writes has bought it, because then there'll be no one left to buy it. So pop over to literatureandlatte.com to get your 20% off. But you have to type in the code BestsellerXP to get that special discount. So, Mr. Stay, this has been an exciting venture. Welcome to snowy climes of Canada. For everyone live with us in the studio, welcome. It's great to have you here. We have lots of great people in the studio. Let's just say hello to a few of them. We've got Ian, we've got Gareth, Craig, Stephanie, Mark. We have Jack, Richard, Logan, Dylan, Robin, Sage, Lorna. The list goes on. Mr. Stave, you've got snow in England right now. I hear you're in Arctic conditions as well, are you?
There was a smattering of snow. We didn't get any. We didn't get a single bit. We got slush, and that was it. So I was really disappointed. We're just damp over here, just a little bit moist. That's all.
Oh well, I mean, I'll send you a little bit of a thermos with some snow from Canada if you like, and you can can kind of eat on that if you like. But yeah, we had a dumping yesterday, and but this is Canada. We get like 3 or 4 inches of snow fall in a couple of hours, and the kids still don't get a snow day. I mean, what's for that? In the UK, 1 snowflake, national disaster. Yeah, right?
Chaos.
Trains stop.
Chaos.
It's hysterical. But anyway, welcome to Canada. Go to school on a moose. No stereotypes there. But we've got a great show for you today. Today we do this every month. So anyone who's a patron supporter that joins us and supports the podcast gets to join us live in the studio. And we are going to be taking live questions from our studio audience. And today we've got a very special theme, Mark. Tell everyone about the theme today.
Well, this started with the author Gavin G. Smith, who is just brilliant. I love the guy. And he's catching up on episodes. He said, I'm listening to the Alison Belsham episode telling off Mark Stay on episode 153 of the Bestseller Experiment about slagging off first drafts. It's as satisfying as the time that Sarah Pinborough pointed out that writing every day is bollocks. and Alison joined in. She said, yeah, it had to be said. So it got me thinking about the rules, these rules of writing that we talk about, these rules that we kind of cling to. And, I asked on the BXP group, which is the exclusive group for our Patreon supporters, what writing rules do you like to break? Now, I put inverted commas around the rules because, as you know, I don't like the word rules. They're probably better described as principles, And we've got quite a lot of feedback. So what I thought we could do is talk about some of these rules and if we should break them and what happens when we break them, and do we like to break them? Is our writing improved by them? And see where we go from there. So yeah, lots to get through tonight.
Excellent stuff. We'll also be announcing, just to stick with us whilst we're doing this live broadcast, we're also going to be announcing the winner of the Ian Rankin competition. We had 3 limited edition or first edition books of Ian Rankin, so hold tight for those. We'll be doing that later in the show, and also doing some shout outs on the social media this week, because I know there's been a lot of stuff. I've just got to say, we've had Sage mentioned that within minutes of each other, we've already mentioned the words moist and dumping. So we're off to a good start. We're getting a bit of reputation here, aren't we?
Setting the tone.
Absolutely. You know what to expect if you've been with us for more than a few weeks. If it's your first time with us, of course, please do sit down and take some aspirin. You might need it by the end of this hour. So let's dive in, Mark. What was the? Well, actually, no. Before we do this, I just want to say, extremely exciting news. Your end. I saw a very interesting video of you running into what I assume is where you're sitting right now with a box that was unwrapped. Tell everyone what was going on there.
It's here. The end of magic is here. Yes, it was very, very exciting. The first box was delivered of my author copies of The End of Magic, the paperback, which I have in my hot little hands right here. And Claire, who is a massive Back to the Future fan, thought it'd be a great idea if we reenacted that scene from the end of Back to the Future, where George McFly finally gets the copies of his science fiction book, and Claire knew all the lines off the top of her head. That's how much she knows Back to the Future. So we acted that out, and we did open the box, with the camera rolling. Emily was filming it. It was one of those moments where, like you were saying, you could open it up and they're all printed upside down or something. But
yeah,
no,
exactly.
They were all fantastic. They've all got that lovely shiny spot lamination. Surprisingly chunky. That was the big surprise.
I know.
It's
That's what you said on the video,
book.
wasn't it? It's like, God, it's really thick.
Yeah.
That's superb.
Value for money, man.
It's brilliant.
370 odd pages.
Brilliant moment.
It was brilliant.
What a brilliant moment. I just think that is the moment when you've worked so hard in writing a book and it's taken so long, and you've edited it and you've gone through the cover and you've gone through all that process. That moment where you actually get to write. And you know what? In the music world, we don't get that anymore. Because I remember when I released my first ever CD, the first thing I did on day of launch was I was down at HMV at like 8:59 and the doors open and I went running in to see if I could find Under You and Urban Myth Club, our little CD. And it was such a magical moment. But now you just stick stuff up. And I guess in some ways with ebooks, it's almost like worth just doing a printed run of your book just so you can have that experience as an author to actually open it and hold it in your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those moments, because I didn't really get this with Robot Overlords, because I was in the office and I think there was a guy called Paul Hussey from the production department. He ran over and gave me a copy, which was a wonderful moment, but it wasn't having that box delivered to the door, which was just, it was really exciting, because you could, of course, on your phone you can track the delivery, so you can see where this guy is pinging all over the place with his van before he gets to you. So yeah, it was a wonderful moment. And what's been fantastic, and a big thank you to everyone who's done this, everyone who pledged on Unbound. They got the book just a day or so after me. They've got it way ahead of publication, about a week ahead of publication, which is fantastic. And so many people have been putting pictures of the book on social media and tagging me so that I can see it. And it's been to Thailand. It's been to South Africa. It's been to Chile. And, I've seen pictures of it with people's cats, with broomsticks, in people's, rooms in libraries. Blackpool. Yes, thank you, Richard.
Well, we've got Richard. Richard says it's a lovely quality book. So he's obviously got his copy. Jack says the same thing.
Yeah.
Sage actually says a lovely compliment. She says it's a proper book. She's like, it's just great. Craig says he's still waiting for his copy in Canada. And Craig, I am too, actually. I'm sitting here feeling very jealous to not have a copy of mine. But Canada seems to take a long. Darn those moose, he says. Dinner was, no, hang on, who's it said? Somebody said it's arrived in South Africa today. And our postal service, Sage says, hers arrived in South Africa today, and our postal service is pathetic usually. So that's amazing.
I know some Americans have got theirs today. So some folks from the States have been messaging me. So
I need to ask you a question, Mark. If people who missed the big crowdfunding for the book, how can they actually get a copy now?
It's available from all good booksellers. Now, technically, Unbound only have UK and Commonwealth rights, excluding Canada, I think. But to be honest, if you go to the bookdepository.com, okay, the book depository ships worldwide, free postage and packing.
Fantastic. So pop along to there then if you want.
I will be... go to Book Depository. I will be doing a print-on-demand edition for the United States at some point as well. So,
Excellent.
But
that's very exciting. Well, congratulations, mate. I'm so happy for you that it's out there. And I was thinking the other day, it's the first book that you've actually written in the traditional way, isn't it? Because The Robots Overlord was as a result of having written a screenplay that you had to kind of reverse engineer the book. Back to Reality was something you wrote with me, which wasn't a proper experience whatsoever.
It was an experience.
But what I'm saying is, this is the first one you've actually sat down, start to finish, as a kind of like single author. And done it, right? So that's a massive achievement.
Yeah, it's all on me. I can only blame myself. So and I think because of that, the excitement is that little bit more intense.
Absolutely.
And that first week, and waiting for those first reviews. And I've had one blogger review it already. I've had a couple of people online give me feedback and reviews, and it's all been great so far. I did have someone on a friend on Instagram was talking about a particular character, going, "Oh, I love this character, it's wonderful." And I'm going, "Yeah, they're brilliant, aren't they?" And then a day later, she messaged me and said, "How could you?" Because something happens to
you're going to get a bit of the old Game of Thrones thrown in, right? Yes. I love it. I thought you were about to say that she was saying how wonderful the character was, only to find out a chapter later that it was based on her. Which would be quite awkward, depending on what, especially if you killed her off. But anyway, moving swiftly on. So let's dive in, Mark. Let's talk about some of the rules. We talked about this list of rules that we've been kind of collecting in some ways, the principles. What came up when you posted it on social media? What were some of the things you got back?
Well, the first one was write every day. And of course, this has already been challenged by the wonderful Sarah Pimborough, who did say, write every day. Who does that? Who writes every day? And it's interesting, since then, we've spoken to people like Mark Billingham, who doesn't write every day. He will carve out a chunk of the year to write, and he'll do that kind of in an intense way. So it's it's MD Thomas, he said, "I don't feel the need to write every day, but I do think you should think about your work in progress every day. And that such time is just as important as keyboard time." And Ian Sainsbury's with us today. Anyone tried not thinking about your work in progress every day? Best of luck with that. So, so it's the write every day thing. I mean, I get up, take my son to school. I'm usually writing about 7:30 every morning, and I do try to write. I mean, yesterday, absolutely cracking day, really good, about 1,500 words. Today, nice. Much harder for whatever reason, I managed about 800 words and that was it. But again, it gives you something to play with. But I do, I will have time off. Like January, I hardly wrote at all. I was critiquing a couple of books, and that was taking up my writing time. But that was good because I was exercising a different part of the brain altogether. And it put me in a slightly different state of mind, in that when I came to look at my own writing, I was thinking a lot more critically about it. Right. So in a way that really helped. So, write every day, it's a bit different. Sage says here, Joanna Penn is a burst writer too. Oh, that's a new term. I've not heard
burst
that before.
Writer. What does that mean, Sage? I've not heard that term before. I've heard of sprint. I've heard of sprinting, which is when you kind of set a timer and you race against the clock. Or I've raced against Shannon Mayer. Did I ever tell you about that experience? Oh my gosh!
Oh really?
So anyone who's missed the whole Shannon Mayer experience, we've had Shannon on the show probably 4 times. She's up to, she told me the other day, 2.3 million book sales is what she's at right now. She's an indie author, full-time mum and author, running her own publishing company. Now, I went on a retreat with her once and we did a sprint. And the idea is that we basically set our own target. We weren't trying to beat each other, but we set our own target. And I said, right, we're doing a half-hour sprint. I'm going to go for 1,000 words, which I thought was pretty ridiculous. All right, 1,000 words in half an hour. Shannon went for 2,500. I didn't manage 1,000. She beat her 2,500. It's just Absolutely insane. So,
were these words in an actual sequential order?
Yeah, well, yes.
Or was it just
gibberish? Mine were just gibberish, but yes. Talking of Shannon, actually, for anyone who's interested in doing a private Q&A with her, we've actually set up for the BXP team. This is the Patreon group, people that support the podcast. Shannon is actually going to join us for a private Q&A with just our Patreon supporters. So if you'd like to get involved in that, we've not announced the date yet, but if you sign up to the Chart Toppers level on the podcast support, you go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Join us, get on the list to have a very exclusive one-on-one with Shannon. Ask her anything you want, as long as it's about books, obviously. And actually, one of the things, Mark, says, whilst we've been live on air, I've actually set up a little poll asking, do you write every day? So I want everyone in the studio to tell us whether they write. And I'll bring you some live results so we can actually see what the reality is out in writing land.
We're getting some feedback. Lorna says, I don't write every day. I wish I could. But when I do get on the computer, I just go for it because I've been writing it in my head for days, which sounds cool. Sage clarifies that Joanna Penn sort of writes in big bursts, maybe not for a couple of weeks, then loads and loads in one go. Robin, when I did my 10K day, I hit over 1,000 words in half an hour a few times. Whoa. So,
see,
yeah,
I wonder whether there's, okay, I've got to say, I'm definitely of the school of thought that consistency throughout the week, the month, the year, and life is really important. If you think about the basics of pensions, the idea behind putting away a little bit constantly and you end up with a lump sum at the end of, when you retire. I think I definitely err on the side of, if you can write every day, it's definitely the best way to be. The reality, however, I think is very, very challenging because we don't yet know what's going to happen in our day when we wake up. And honestly, poop happens. Stuff happens to us. We get up, and just by the act of living a life, like even today, some Wally was driving at like 80 kilometers an hour on the icy snow roads. And I'm like, he's going to kill someone. And anything can happen. You just never know. So I always say to people, if you want to write every day, you've got to bank it first thing in the morning, because probability says if you get it done first thing in the morning, then there's less chance of your day going AWOL. I don't know if anyone agrees with me on that and whether anyone actually practiced that. I'd like to hear from the questions. But if you try and write, Mark, do you try and do your kind of writing first thing, don't you? Is that your kind of new structure? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how's that working out for you? Is it tend to work generally more often than not?
It's great. It's when I'm freshest. It's when my mind is at its peak. After about 9:30, it's all downhill from there. But yeah, it's working really, really well. And I'm waking up, and as I'm getting breakfast, or I drive my son to his bus stop, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be writing, and then I kind of hit the ground running. So it's been working really well, actually.
Richard says that he agrees with what I said, and says, whilst I don't write every day, I have done in the past, and my hope is to return. So it's almost like an aspiration that we can all have to actually do. I'll tell you something, Mark, right now on the polls. I don't know. Can you see the polls at your end? I don't think you can you? I got all the results here.
Let me click. I'm going to click on the tab.
Can you actually see the result?
Yes, I can see the result.
100% of people so far in the studio audience do not write every day. I should probably do another one, which is, would you like to write every day? And I'm sure that would be 100% the other way around. But Robin says actually she definitely does better during NaNoWriMo when you get into the daily habit, but I don't keep it going outside of NaNoMonths. Now, that's interesting. So that teaches us something, Robin, about how we tend to work best. With something like NaNoWriMo, we talk about the public declaration on the podcast, and NaNoWriMo is in a way a kind of a semi-public declaration, and you're also doing it as a group community. So here on the Bestseller Experiment, we're all trying as a big community to finish books, to start books, and to publish books, and hopefully sell lots of books. And I think becoming part of this community is really helping people. And I think that's partly why we've seen so many people actually writing to us saying, I got a major book deal, I finished my book, I just sold 10,000 copies. So I think, Robin, one of the most important things you can look at is this public declaration. Is anyone actually, okay, here we go. I'm going to put this out to our family of listeners right now. Is anyone willing on this show to publicly declare that they're going to write every day for the next month? We will shout you out. And next month, we're going to also shout you out again. No,
We've got a no from Ian.
No from Ian.
No. Stephanie says I will.
Well done, Stephanie. Right, so Stephanie's going to write every day.
Florida
so Stephanie,
tumbleweed. Richie's here. Richie Yanakowicz. Hello, Richie. He writes every day.
Tell us, Stephanie.
Sage is in. Sage is in.
Okay, everyone is saying yes. Okay, Robin. We've got Robin, Sage, and we've got 3 very wonderful volunteers. Robin, Sage, and Stephanie. Stephanie says 500 a day. Right.
Wow.
As does Sage. And Robin, how many words a day are you going to try and write? Because let's work that out. What is 500 words a day, Mark, over the next month? That's 15,
you keep asking me sums. I don't do sums.
Okay.
Where's my calculator?
It's 28 days in Feb, isn't it? 14,000 words. 14,000 words is what?
Boom.
That's nearly a novella. That's a quarter of a... Not even. Yeah, a quarter of a standard kind of... Isn't 60,000 words the kind of average novel length for most books? Is that right?
Craig says, fine, 499 words a day.
Excellent.
See, Robin's editing. Does that count? Well, Robin, you're one step ahead of the game. Word count doesn't matter when it comes to editing.
No, pages.
That's when you bring your word count down.
No. Here's a really important thing, though. Somebody I spoke with recently, we always use word count when we're writing, but what do you do for editing? Page count. Right? So a page count a day. Yeah. No, don't. This is... You've got to set goals because editing's hard. Editing's super hard for some people.
Yeah, but you can't always think of it that way because sometimes you'll be editing a thread or a particular character. So they'll come back and say, you know what, this character has an issue, and you need to basically go through the whole book with that character and look. And there might be a paragraph here, a paragraph. It's not always something you can measure.
So Robin has actually responded to that. She says, "I'll do 2 hours a day." So that's interesting. So she's using a kind of a timer block. Does anyone use pages a day for editing? I'm curious because I just heard somebody say that and I thought that's a really cool idea because it gives you something tangible to keep track. Obviously, it's some pages are going to take longer than others, but I still think it's a valid thing that might work for some people for sure.
Screenwriters measure in pages.
Do they?
A lot of screenwriters will say, if I get 5 pages a day done, I'm great because the word count. There's far fewer words in the screenplay, but it's in some ways it's a bit more difficult to get those words on the page, and so screenwriters do the page count thing. And if you can get 3 to 5 pages a day is a pretty good day. 10 pages, you are rocking it. You're absolutely rocking it.
So thank you to everyone who's publicly declared that they're going to write every day. We actually have an anonymous person who might want to declare who they are in the studio, who's actually said they do write every day. So our poll currently stands at write every day, 9%, and not writing every day, 90% or 91%. So interesting. Excellent, Mark. Well, let's move on to the next rule that came up.
Well, I want to talk about the kill your darlings thing because SC Moorhead brought this up today because she put up a thing on the group. She said, slaughter your darlings. I've just absolutely butchered my manuscript in the hope of rewriting it in the next 6 weeks and making it the best it can be. Chopped up, diced, sliced, put in a blender, kind of slaughtered. And, this is something you'll hear in editorial all the time. And if you listen to the one-page punch-up from last week, certainly the bit I remember from my bit is that the lines that Emad hated in my piece were my favourite lines. Oh. They were the lines that I loved. But as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking... Yeah, they are kind of unnecessary. They could be cut. But, do I cut it? I mean, I've already cut a couple from that piece. I've taken his advice on board. But this whole kill your darlings thing, it's a rule that's been around for,
How would you define it though, Mark? Because I remember when I first heard that as a novice writer, I had no idea what it meant. So people listening to the podcast who've never heard of that before, how would you define what killing your darlings actually is?
Killing your darlings, certainly on a first draft, you tend to be a bit more flowery. You tend to gild the lily. There tend to be things that you've added which later turn out to be unnecessary. On your first draft, you might discover that, that character didn't need that monologue where they explained their childhood to someone else, even though it was beautifully written. It's dramatized in a much more effective way later on. So do you take that beautifully written speech, which is really emotive, but doesn't really add anything to the story, or do you leave it in, or do you cut it? And that thing of killing your darlings is that difficult decision where you have to take out the things that you love the most. In Robot Overlords, we had a fantastic chase sequence through the woods with a robot that's not featured in the film. They had these kind of, Dr. Octopus kind of tentacle arms, and they were swinging through the woods, chasing after the kids. And it would have been absolutely fantastic. But the truth was, we had a sequence that already kind of did that. And it would have been so really, really expensive. And so it was cut from the movie. And when I came to the novelization, I kind of thought, I can put that back in. But the truth was, it wasn't necessary. It didn't actually drive the story forward. So I didn't even put it in the novel. So it was a thing that I loved. It was a sequence. There was another thing. I had a chase with an ice cream van. The kids nicked an ice cream van and were being chased by robots.
Oh, that sounds like my dream.
It was a really, really...
I'd love to nick an ice cream truck.
It was a really, really fun sequence. But because we cut 2 other characters out of the story, that sequence got cut. And again, it was like, but it went, So, yes, Ian says, story wins every time. Murder those darlings if they don't serve it. Same with songwriting. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Don't bore us, get to the chorus, says Sage.
That's true. That's a very good way of putting it, because in a song, you've got 3.5 minutes.
Mark makes an interesting point, which is you can always consider it for a reader magnet if you do have to cut it, but still love it. And that's interesting advice, actually.
Yeah, it's like the DVD extras in some ways.
Deleted scene.
Nothing's ever wasted. I think that should be a rule. Nothing is ever wasted. Absolutely. Good point, Mark. Ian says he used cuts chapters as giveaways. So when people think, what am I going to give away? I don't have a novella, or I don't have, I don't want to write an extra story. Use anything. It really, if something's of value, ultimately, your biggest fans will love it if there's more, because they can't get enough of it, basically, once they start reading. I mean, this is what Shannon said with her series. You start to get this really core group of people. It doesn't have to be enormous to sell millions of books. It just has to be hugely dedicated, and they will literally eat up everything that you write. And they're very forgiving as well, apparently. So, don't think of anything as potential, just cutting room floor stuff. Sage says, what doesn't kill you makes for a good story later. Like it. And it works in reverse potentially too as well, she thinks. So we actually had a massive kind of debate, in quotes, he says, when we were writing our book Back to Reality, because we had entire sections. Do you remember, Mark? We had like a whole drive to Glastonbury. We had a scene. For anyone who's read the book, you'll know about the how the kind of story evolves. But there's a kind of a pilgrimage, if you like, to Glastonbury for reasons which you need to read the book to find out. But we had this whole scene, and I wrote this section about our protagonist Joe getting stopped by a police officer, and I thought it was really funny. And you were just like, "No, it's not doing anything. It's not moving the story on." And it's really actually quite interesting when you're co-writing, because you're getting that instant feedback, like whilst you're writing the story, as opposed to an editor who reads the whole thing and says, "Look, you've got to go to this chapter." And in some ways, it was kind of easier to kill the darlings as we wrote it, because I think the longer something is in the manuscript, the more attached you can potentially get to it. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, that's why they become darlings. They become almost fixed points in the story that you move around. And if the other feeling is, if you remove that fixed point, does the whole thing collapse? But very often you find it doesn't.
I wonder. Here's a good question. Like, so we had an experience of co-authoring this book together. We'd write bits and bobs. We'd both kind of give each other pretty much instant feedback, and then we'd either cut stuff if it wasn't working. I guess the problem is, if you actually end up writing the whole thing, and there's more kind of undoing that needs to happen if you have to reverse engineer it. So, question for everyone, and you, Mr. Stay, is there a benefit of finding someone that you trust who would actually read the book as you write it, who can give you that feedback, like we could together as kind of co-authors of our book?
I mean, it's something that happens in screenwriting. The problem with that is we had a guy from the BFI who was a script development executive, who we did that. We'd write it and send pages in, and we'd send drafts. But what would happen? Obviously, this person wasn't just dealing with us; they were dealing with dozens of other scripts as well, and they would start remembering stuff from previous drafts that we'd actually cut. So they'd say, "Oh, isn't that character? But didn't they do that?" And you say, "No, we cut that." And they have a memory of stuff that was in the previous draft that isn't in the current draft. So it is tricky. And of course, I remember the number of times that I wrote something, you said, that doesn't make sense. I said, but it will down the line.
Right.
You know, if we keep the faith with this will pay. This is setting something up that's going to pay off further down the line. And again, you know, you have to reserve the right to change your mind about stuff as well. I'm the thing I'm writing at the moment. I'm about a third of the way through it, and there's something in the second chapter I'm thinking, I've set that up. I don't think I need that now, or it needs to be something different, because the story's evolving in a way, and I'm kind of pantsing this one, I'm not outlining it.
Right.
And the story's evolving in a way where I'm thinking, yeah, that's going to become irrelevant. So that's the thing where you're juggling stuff in your head as you're writing, and it is always subject to change, which is why it's so important to finish something. I think if you have someone telling you every day or whatever, that doesn't make sense, that you will start getting crippled by self-doubt. So I think keep it to yourself, keep it in your head until you actually finish the damn thing, and then get someone to rip it apart.
Interesting things coming back from the studio audience. We've had it seems to be a bit of theme going here, Mark, actually, with spouses and feedback. dangerous territory. I don't even know if I should say any of these things live on air, but Dylan says something really interesting. He says that depends who the person is, because really, ultimately, it really does depend on the person is. And spouses in particular can be exceptionally honest, should we say? Because they don't, right?
You've got to say it. Dylan says, my wife is heartless, so I tend to trust her judgment.
But do you know what, Dylan?
Shall I prepare the doghouse for sir?
No. Do you know what I think he's referring to, though? Do you know what I think he's referring to, Mark? What instantly came to mind, Dylan, when you posted that, as I thought of Stephen King. Right, because Stephen King and Tabitha King, right? Stephen King uses Tabitha as his main. Doesn't he mention that in his book? He uses Tabitha.
Tabitha saved his career. He threw Carrie in the trash.
That's it.
She got it out.
Yes.
So yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. Be Tabitha King.
Yeah. So Dylan, maybe you're onto something there. There is something about spouses, though. That it's so hard because it's a whole emotional thing. Like I learned long ago actually that I could never coach my wife. Not that I wanted to, but there's certain things, you can as a living you can be a coach, but if you go and try and coach your kids, they're just not interested. They're like, I'm like, do you know how much I charge for my coaching? And they're like, Dad, not interested. It's like crazy. Yeah. We also have a few other comments. Jack says my husband would just forget what he read, which is interesting. But yeah, I think there could be some. I think everyone needs someone that they can trust. Ultimately, even if it's at the end of the book. Who has good judgment.
Claire is a terrible reader of things. She reads a lot of non-fiction. She's into gardening, of course, reading a lot of gardening and cookery books. If I give her fiction, there's an old Woody Allen joke where he talks about he was kidnapped and his dad got the ransom note and he read it and fell asleep, then loaned it out to people and never got to the end of it. That's what Claire is like. It takes her forever to read a novel because she's out toiling the soil. She's totally knackered by the end of the day, working the land. So I learned a long time ago. If I'd relied on Claire to give me feedback, I'd never finish anything. So right. And she knows that. And so
Sage
she will get around to reading it eventually.
This is great. Sage says, to be fair, if you don't trust your spouse's judgment, then you probably shouldn't be married to them. Which I think is very wise. Sage wisdom. Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. So, Mark, there were tons of other rules. Let's rock through them because we are running out of time here. There's so much stuff we want to cover today, isn't there?
Well, one that I find really interesting is the idea that your character should have agency. Your character should drive the plot. And this comes from that Joseph Campbell idea that, your hero crosses a threshold, makes choices that drives the story forward. This is I saw a fantastic thread with Aliette de Bodard, who's a science fiction author. She's French Vietnamese, I believe. Mm-hmm. And her books are amazing. And she's well versed in that kind of Asian tradition of storytelling, which if you watch any of those Studio Ghibli movies like Spirited Away. I remember the first time I watched Spirited Away, I was blown away by it, but I was like, what's the story in this?
Yeah.
This little girl isn't really driving the story at all, but it's still engaging. It's still completely enthralling. Funnily enough, Neil Gaiman does this a lot. Neil Gaiman's stories, you read American Gods, and Shadow, the character at the center of it, he's dragged along by the story. He rarely drives the story. He really makes decisions that change what happens. Dylan says a focus on the individual is a very Western thing. So Ian says Arthur Dent. Arthur Dent is the same. Arthur wakes up and gets dragged along by the story. So it's interesting. We do, and again, I think it comes a lot, not necessarily from Joseph Campbell, but more the writer's journey, the Vogler thing, which became a screenwriting thing. And that is very much a screenwriting thing. If you want to make a Hollywood movie, you do kind of need that protagonist driving the story along. But I think this idea that characters should, have agency, should be driving the story, it's one that I think if you're Neil Gaiman or Hayao Miyazaki at Studio Ghibli, you can probably get away with it. And it's a tricky one to pull off. Really tricky one to pull off.
That's what I think the key is here. Is I think that it's not something that novice writers should play with. I don't think. I think that comes if you look at the number of actual books written that don't have a character. So a number of, say, if we were to get, 1,000 top best-selling books ever, how many of those actually doesn't have a central character driving the story? It's probably a very, very small percentage. And like you say, there's only a certain amount of, the story, that everything else around the story is so powerful that it doesn't need that driving character. But I wonder whether that's just, the geniuses amongst the writing community that can pull that one off. I'd be very nervous about trying that myself.
Yeah. Ian says it's easier to identify with a character who doesn't have agency. With Arthur Dent, it's actually Ford Prefect who drives it at first, and then Zaphod. So they are the characters who create chaos in Arthur's world, and Arthur is kind of along for because all Arthur ever really wants is a decent cup of tea. That is the running gag through all the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. He just wants a decent cup of tea, and I don't think he gets it until book 5. So it's
it's a bit like a hobnob thing, isn't it? Sorry, I had to mention that, but
do
you know?
Well, that's the thing. I put this thing on Facebook, and it devolves into a conversation about hobnobs. So I don't know how that was you. That was you poking.
I did. I just said that it was what was my rule was to. I can't remember what the rule was now, but it was a reference to the fact that if you have anything on your writing desk, whether it's anything kind of sweet or chocolatey or hobnobby, it's very difficult to not finish the whole packet in one sitting. And so I think the idea was to only have if you're going to reward yourself when you're writing, you don't leave the whole thing on your desk. Just have the one biscuit and then you're good to go. Yeah, but it's usually me bringing things into pandemonium. You know that, Mark. That's my job on this show, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Whether it's dodgy microphones or anything else. So interesting stuff. Dylan says character is rarely the driver. Interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I think in sort of in that Western storytelling, it very much is. But I mean, again, we're talking about novels rather than movies.
And he says sorry, he says in Asimov books as well. So it's clarifying that.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Isaac Asimov. Yeah. Well, Asimov, you're dealing with big science fiction, big empires, big, where you are just a speck in a much bigger thing. So again, like Arthur Dent, it's difficult to give a character agency when there's an entire galaxy revolving around them. So it's so Robin suggested we should get sponsorship from hobnobs. Oh, that's a great idea.
Yes. That's actually been the plan all along, Mark. I just didn't say it. But absolutely. Just see the truck reversing into the driveway as we're speaking. That'd be awesome. Before we dive into the next rule, Mark, I think it's time to announce the winner of our incredible Ian ranking competition. For anyone that missed out on this, I'm really sorry, but you need to listen to the podcast more regularly. But Mark got 3 incredible books when he interviewed Ian Rankin for our Christmas special. 3 hardback books, first edition, signed by the man himself. The books were Even Dogs in the Wild. There we go. Look, Mark's even gotten there. Even Dogs in the Wild.
In A House of Lies, which is his latest book.
Yeah.
Even Dogs in the Wild and Rather Be the Devil.
Awesome.
All signed, all amazing.
Thank you to everyone who entered. We had loads of people enter. Mark's doing some modelling with the books right now. See, this is what you get when you come and watch this live on video, folks. Sign up to support the podcast. You get to see Mark stroking Ian Rankin books. Which other podcast gives you value for money like that? So I think, Mark, you've got your... do you have a drum roll to hand? I don't know if Mark's... It's like trying to work with Ringo from the Beatles again. It's like, we'll have a little drum roll because we do technology. Ringo. We do technology here. We go. Let's see if this works.
This is the drum roll on YouTube. This is another behind the scenes thing. I don't actually have a drum. My son George has a drum kit in the other room, but now here we go. So ready?
All right. Tension is killing me. And the winner is Debbie Skirton. Congratulations, Debbie. So,
congratulations, Debbie.
We'll need you to email us your address and we'll get those 3 books whipped off to you in the post. So congratulations. Thank you to everyone else who entered. If you didn't win this time, keep an eye out because we have lots and lots of great giveaways on the website that come up from time to time. So just keep checking in the podcast. Now, Mark, one other thing that we need to also do today before we get lost in amongst all the other questions, we've got something fairly major to do, haven't we, which we haven't talked about at all. We are going to do, live to our studio audience, a cover reveal of Back to Reality.
Shall I get the drum kit out again?
No, I just want to say, double drum kit in one episode. Come on.
Robin was shocked that it's not a real drum kit. You've
blown it.
Gasps! Now. It's not a real drum.
My music career is
Stephanie
over.
says such a small drum kit, and Ian says never diss the size of a man's drum kit.
So, so we're going to do actually a cover reveal. Now, a little bit of background. We've used demonza.com, who are a brilliant company. They only do high-end professional book covers. And we thought, well, you know what? Let's give them a go because we know that our friend Shannon May used them and it changed her career, actually, a cover that she changed everything. So we thought, let's try that with Back to Reality. So what we did is we actually, we went to them and as sponsors of the show, we have, and I'll throw this out there now, you can actually use them as well. They're giving us 10% off for our listeners. So to grab that, go to demonza.com/bestsellerxp. Use the code BestsellerXP. You get a really cool form that asks you all these great questions about your book, which helps the designer work out where to start, references to other covers, all these kinds of things. Really useful, actually, just as an exercise to go through, even if you're not thinking of actually needing cover right now. Fill out that form because it really gets you focused as to what it is that you're looking for, and it starts the old grey matter whirring around covers. But to get that discount, you basically put in the code BestsellerXP at the bottom of the form. Press submit and you get that money off. They also do lots of other things, ebooks, designs, trailers for your books, the lot. So we use them. You'll see what we've done. We actually got 4 designs from them initially, very, very quickly within less than a week. And we put it up on our BXP team, our private Facebook group, and we asked people to give our comments without telling them anything about what we thought of it. And since that point, so thank you firstly to everyone that gave us feedback. It was absolutely incredible, wasn't it, Mark, to get everyone's feedback on the
really useful, really
super
useful.
Cool.
Yeah,
so if you want to do that yourself, join the group and put your cover designs up and get feedback from the same group of people that are part of, who support this show. It's really amazing. Anyway, we picked one, which happened to also be the most popular one that most people picked, and then we've been through, I think, about 5 reiterations of the cover, haven't we now, Mark?
Oh,
at least 5. And
the poor designer. We should give the designer a shout out as well.
Yeah, Alicia. We're going to say thank you to Alicia. No, but this is the point. Demonza do unlimited revisions. So, and a lot of them are minor tweaks. We really had the core of the cover actually within the first design, didn't we? Which is amazing, which is quite unusual, I think.
Yeah.
But Mark, let's Mark's going to hold up for everyone that can't see this, obviously, on the podcast. We apologise, but you'll be able to go along to the Facebook group for Bestseller Experiment to look at the cover, Mark, when this podcast goes live next week, I'm guessing. He says, "Good at Mark going. Are we going to put?
Yes,
yeah, we're going to make it
Sorry.
live. Yeah, okay. So we'll actually put it on the Facebook group next week. But everyone who is on the podcast audience now can actually see it. So Mark's desperately trying to find it. So I'm just going to
I thought you were going to do a screen share. You've sprung this on me. Hang on.
I can do that as well if you like.
Because my MacBook died today. The trackpad died, so I've got to take it in, and it's on my MacBook. I can't turn.
I'll tell you what. I'll bring up.
This.
I can do that. Absolutely.
You'll have it on email. You can do a screen share, can't you?
I can. And I'll work out how to do that. But let's go on to the next rule whilst I work around that in the background. There you go.
Okay. All right. Oh, teasing.
Yeah. You see, we like to drag it out a bit.
Yes. The next. Extra. Just going back to that agency thing, Julian Barr on the BXP page, he made a very interesting point. He said, I agree with most of the rules in principle, but I get annoyed when they're used as a stick to beat people. It's important to know why the rules exist and not to be rigid about them, bearing in mind what's important about them. For example, generally, character agency is something to strive for, but there will be times when loss of agency makes an excellent way to raise the stakes. And I think he makes
that's a really, brilliant point. Really good point. Really good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good overriding principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings us to another rule, which is every scene should drive the story. And that is every part of your story should be pushing every event that happens, every conversation, every piece of action should be driving things forward. Now, of course, I was talking to a writer about this the other day, about the kind of the way readers are one step ahead of the writer so much. If you go back and read something from early 20th century, late 19th century, if you read some Dickens, for example, you read some Conan Doyle, it can read quite slowly because there's an awful lot of description of characters, of environments, stuff that isn't necessarily driving the story forward, isn't necessarily pertinent to the ultimate crux of what the story is about. And certainly in the 21st century, a lot of that would get cut. But what, of course, that does is it gives atmosphere, it gives texture to the story. Certainly the thing that I'm writing at the moment is set in the autumn. And I've made a note to myself that when I get to the end of it, I'm going to go back and just fold in stuff about the countryside in the autumn, what kind of birds, what kind of the weather would be like, what the soil would feel like under your feet, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily the most important thing when it, certainly for my first draft, for getting it down. But I think if I thread that through carefully, I can give the book a little bit of extra atmosphere and stuff like that. I think can make a difference. Ian says, reading Oliver Twist to my daughter now, all that detail is immersive. So yeah, I think that's a very good point. And he mentions Gormenghast as well, which again, really
that was an interesting.
Into the
that's
story,
a great book actually, and great series on the BBC as well.
Fantastic,
loved it.
Yeah. So Mark says, I'm making sure there's lots of description in mind when it's needed for atmosphere. If it doesn't add something to the story, though, I think it can go. I mean, we had this on the one-page punch-up last week. It was Andrew's entry about a character stepping into a hotel room, and he gives quite detailed description. It was all good stuff, but at the end, he made a comment saying it had a hint of old colonialism about the room. And frankly, that's all I needed. With that, I could fill in the gaps. I knew what I was looking at. But that's because certainly, I've read some Graham Greene. I've seen films that are set in that colonial era. I kind of have a picture of what that's like. Whereas maybe late 19th century, early 20th century, the readers won't have been so well versed in that. So it needed that little bit of extra description. But yeah, it's. I think you should allow yourself little moments for a novel to breathe. It's not something necessarily you can get away with in a screenplay, but give it moments to breathe. Choose your fights, choose your moments where it can just you can immerse yourself and enjoy the location or the smells or the textures.
Sage says atmosphere is really important. Mark says I'm making sure there's lots of description in mine when it's needed for atmosphere. If it doesn't add something to the story, though, I think it can go. And Dylan says, I hear that a lot, but I've never seen anyone truly define drive, which is interesting as well. Like, what is driving? I mean, I always think, what I always think? I always think of like James Patterson novels and those kind of I guess you define them as airport blockbusters, where it's like literally you start reading the first page and like all hell's going loose, and it's just like, you know, there's an explosion within the first 30 seconds, and it's like a Bourne movie. Do you ever remember going to see the Bourne movie in the cinema? It was like you didn't get a chance to breathe. You were absolutely knackered by the end of the film. You walked out, you're like, bloody hell, you're like shaking. Mad Max was another one. It just didn't stop. And I think sometimes a bit like, again, we can reference music. I mean, what DJs do within any set is they have this kind of like ebb and flow, and they actually build their sets so that there are moments where the people dancing can actually just like slow down a bit, grab a sip of water before they go off on another big dance. Because in some ways, to keep people with you the whole time on the dance floor, you can't wear them out within the first 30 minutes. You need to kind of give them chances to breathe. So maybe there's a bit of that in play as well.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you have an intense scene, be it an action scene, a romance scene, a piece of drama between two people yelling at each other, whatever, I think after that, if you just pile in with even more action, it will exhaust the reader and they start to disengage. And I think, you know, give people time to recover. You know, Robin says you need the ebb and fall of emotions to keep the momentum. That's nice.
But it's also about not just then having a useless thing that follows. It still has to be of importance, but it just doesn't have to have that drive, the urgency, that kind of continual forward movement in chunky parts of the milestones in the plot. I think that's what my reading on it is anyway. But Mark, I actually have a button here called share screen. Shall I give it a go? I don't know if it's going to work.
Oh, let me get the drum kit.
Oh, don't build it up because it might not work.
No. We're going to get. I promise.
I've never. Okay, so for anyone ever using this, we're using a live webinar software to do this. We've never used and tested any of this stuff because it's an experiment. That's what we're about. It's the bestseller experiment. It's Mark and Mark Break the Internet, or as it's called, Wreck It Mark 3. That's what we're going for right now. Go for it.
Are you ready? Go on. Let's go.
Okay. All right. All right, there we go. Will this work? Does that work? Can you see?
Yes,
it actually works. Yes. There we go, everyone. There is our new cover. And it's... Everyone's like starting to type. People may have actually seen this before because some of the people in the studio are probably the people that helped us on it. But
lovely, fabulous,
here
gorgeous,
we go.
fantastic,
this is gorgeous.
perfect.
Thank you, Sage. Jack says fantastic.
Ian says, am I allowed to admit I didn't like the original cover?
You can, because we struggled as well. Even our designer actually wasn't 100% happy with it. You can tell us all now. Just don't tell us if you don't like this one.
Colours.
Let us burn first before you redesign it for the third time. But yeah, that is our
people
cover.
talking about the colours, and I think they're right. The colours are great.
So for anyone that can't see, so obviously listening to this podcast, you're like, well, this is great. You know, this is really...
Craig says, love that. Really poops. Oh, pops.
Quote of the day goes to Craig. Really poops. Which is kind of funny because there is a bit of that. There is a bit of that theme in the book, isn't there, Mark? So I quite like that. For anyone that can't see the cover, because we're obviously talking about it, go to Facebook now. Go to the web address, Mark, is facebook.com/bestseller
experiment.
Right. So go and join us on there if you haven't. We've got nearly 1,000 people. Bring us up to 1,000. Like our Facebook page. Come and look at the cover and let us know what you think. As long as you don't think it poops, because we had so just kind of an insight into what we went through to get to this point. We even ended up talking about you'll see a central image when you see the cover. There's a central image of a woman falling from the sky. It's pretty awesome, and we even spent like probably 2 weeks trying to get it right so that she's not covering up the letters. At one point, she looked like she was spiked on one of the letters, like she was like landed on the L and it was up her
it's going right up her backside.
It's like the things you go through to get your cover right. I mean, like Mark said, you have to give it almost as much attention as possible. But I'm really excited about this, Mark. I don't know about you. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Really excited.
No, I'm very excited because I think this sits in that genre a lot more than our one did. I mean, you know, we've talked about this before that it's, you know, the book did previously look like a self-help book. And again, there's a bit people are making. Ian says, "Wow, that's some endorsement at the top. Was that Stephen King?" Basically, we've got quote line goes here in one or two lines.
That's the current
at
quote.
top. So we haven't decided. We're going to do some sort of A/B testing.
We should talk about that
as well.
We'll leave that a bit for a deep dive, I think. But we're actually not. We've picked this cover, but we do have an alternative cover, which we also like. Very subtle differences. We're actually going to use both covers in advertising, and we're going to actually use the advertising click-through results to tell us which one is drawing more click-throughs. Because what we think is the best cover might not be the cover that actually sells the most books, and ultimately we need to sell 10,000 books by the 30th of June this year. So everything pretty much is banking on that cover. So, well, that was exciting, Mark. It actually worked.
Yeah,
I'm just going to...
Great reaction as well. Dylan says landing on those tiny buildings is going to hurt. Jack says, especially that gherkin one. Ouch, says Dylan.
That's brilliant. Excellent stuff. So, Mark, let's dive back into another rule before we finish up.
Well, this is one. Let me find who originally made the quote. It's talking about staying in one genre. Let me see if I can find who.
Genre is such a funny thing, though, isn't it? I mean, genre in itself. Like, what is a genre? Like, because in music, one of the things I always coach actually in music is that genres are very important, more for external people, for people like journalists to be able to define. Like who you like, who you write like, who you sound like, and it makes it easier for the consumer to go, oh, I might like to read that, and it's so we've got to remember not to get too stuck up with genre in our own world. It's for the external world's defining it, and we had that with Back to Reality, didn't we? Because we were all over the place with people telling us it was comedy.
Well, it was Craig. It's Craig Anderson who's with us tonight. He said, "Establish yourself in one genre so you don't confuse your readers." Lol, good one. And I think it's an interesting point because there are authors who get well. I mean, Joanne Harris is the classic one. Joanne Harris wrote a novel called Chocolat. You know, that was her breakthrough novel. If you listen to the episode, she'd written all sorts before, including a sort of a supernatural romance, and she's since written her sort of Norse adventures as well. But because Chocolat is that million-copy seller, she, whenever she's mentioned in the newspapers, it's Joanne Harris, million-copy seller of the book Chocolat that was made into a film with Johnny Depp, blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of, it's what she's known for. But whenever I know that, whenever she brought out one of those Norse adventure books, she would get people on Twitter going, oh, I only like the romance books kind of thing, And it's, I mean, I'm speaking as someone who has had published a teenage book about robots, a comedy book, women's contemporary fiction, comedy, and a fantasy novel. And with any luck, my next novel will either be a folk horror or a middle grade science fiction. I mean, that is a scattergun of genres right there.
Do you know what's interesting, though? It's when, you see, what it is I think what happens is, it's like with Joanna, once you get success in one of those particular genres, from a commercial point of view, I know everyone doesn't like talking about this often when you talk about writing, but from a commercial point of view, if you want to earn a living, you stick to the thing, or you make a major focus, the thing that's actually earning you the money, the thing that you build that. So Shannon May is a classic example, paranormal, urban, what's she call it? Urban fantasy, I think is her.
Paranormal romance.
Yeah, urban fantasy. Right, yeah. And that's where she's building that audience. If she then went out and wrote something completely different, it might not work in terms of actually continuing her like gainful employment within the writing world. So I think for some people it's like they stick with a genre and they keep working on that genre until it works. Or like in your case, you may be trying different types, and because you enjoy writing a broad range, and that's a brilliant thing to do anyway in terms of just improving your writing. But people say,
it's interesting. We spoke about. So, you remember the Peter May episode? Peter May has generally stuck with thrillers, but he's never had a serial character like a Rebus or a Jack Reacher or whatever. But the interesting point you made was his productivity. I think because he kept putting books out at such a rate, he accrued readers from these different genres who, would, in the end, it became a thing, I'll read whatever Peter May writes. So it's, I've already had the conversation with my agent, particularly with the kids' book, because he was saying, "Oh, if you're going to write a kids' book, you should probably be, M.A. Stay, just stick with your initials or something like that." And already, you know what my ego's like when it comes to author names. I'm going, I want my name on the front.
Yeah.
Matthew Riley can get away with it. Why can't I? Kind of thing. Yeah. So I know I'm going to have that fight coming up at some point.
Interesting.
But, people, I don't know.
Well, some great comments coming through.
I think it's something that publishers...
I was going to say,
publishers worry about that.
They do. Well, the publisher ultimately is thinking about it from a commercial perspective, and they don't want to build and they're investors, right? They're investing in they're investing in you as a writer. And then if you suddenly, it's the same in music. If you suddenly go from death metal to folk, you're not going to have a long career. Jack actually mentioned something really interesting. She said she's just moved from historical fiction to murder mystery. Sage says, write whatever you're moved to write. If you're passionate about it, readers will be too. Interesting. That's a really good point, Sage. Ian Sainsbury said, it's tricky. I just had a 3-star review from someone who thinks I should stick to sci-fi and not make a wild and crazy leap to fantasy. So there's all of that comes into play, as well as our own personal experiences of the backlash, from those readers who are basically saying, keep giving us what we love. Craig says, I typically write the book first and then figure out the genre afterwards with mixed success. Again, probably financial success is probably what you're saying.
Robin makes a very good point. Robin says the main thing with switching genres is the also boughts, especially if you write kids' books, then switch to something like horror or steamy romance. Although when I was a kid, I had no problem with horror or steamy romance or steamy horror. I mean, I would read anything. The only people worried about that are the teachers and the parents. But it's a fair point. I mean, I asked Matthew Riley about this. I said, do your kids' books, do you lose those readers? And he said, no, actually, when they get old enough, they switch over to his main books. I mean, his main books aren't particularly adult in the sense that they have much kind of gore in them or violence or anything like that. But it's
key though in this day and age. I think it's more key than it ever has been. I think because of the way that everything is kind of now interconnected. You go on Amazon. We talked about, do we change the name of our book? Oh, we can't really change the name because then we'll lose all the reviews we've got. That's not a writing decision. That's a decision we've had to make because we've already put a lot of effort into getting those reviews and marketing, and we're having to make those decisions based on what might help sell the book. And it's this never-ending debate about, it's the art. It's the act of writing. Write what you love. Write what you want to. You're passionate about. Versus this constant debate about, well, what's the thing that's going to help sell the book? And I've been here for years in music. My partner that I wrote with in music was always about the art, and I was always about the middle ground. It was always about, but ultimately, if we want to make a living out of this, how are we going to kind of find the compromise? I personally think, from my experience in music, it's about compromise. It's about actually sometimes having to make artistic compromises as long as it's not to the point where you think you're selling out or it's really going against what you truly believe in. But it's a struggle and it's a dance until the day that we die, I think. But I think the most important thing is remembering that genre is something that is defined by the outside world, and that shouldn't dictate your boundaries of how you write ultimately.
I mean, I think it's one of the reasons Neil Gaiman has different publishers for his different books. So Bloomsbury over here do Neil Gaiman's children's books. Headline in the UK do his adult books. And, of course, you have the comic books, because if you've read, say, Coraline or the Graveyard Book, you don't want to start necessarily giving kids copies of Sandman, because there's some hardcore stuff in Sandman, or American Gods as well. So, but yeah, there are authors who can do it, but I think there are strategies you can take. Robin says here, you just have to be super clear. Someone in a different group writes sweet romance and erotica. Those two lists don't necessarily want to cross. And I think that's very true. But, you can... The other thing is, authors today have much more control over their message to their readers. If you have a newsletter, if you have a website where you can make these things crystal clear, and in the copy of of your description as well. Because I mean, the thing is, with Joanne Harris as the example, Orion retagged her as Joanne M. Harris for her Norse books, and I failed to see what jot of difference that actually made. They were going after, because Ian Banks and Ian M. Banks. Ian Banks did sort of contemporary fiction. Ian M. Banks did the space opera stuff.
Yeah.
But again, I think if you stop 10 people in the street, I don't think a single one of them would know or care either way. It becomes something for publishers. It makes their life easier. And as a prissy little artist, I'm not that interested.
But are we not all publishers today, Mark? Right? In the indie world,
exactly,
that's the
exactly.
thing. It's
incredible.
It's an incredible shift that we've experienced. But yeah, it's a very it's a debate that could run and run. But Mark, we're getting towards the end of the show. I think it'd be nice to do a few shout outs for social media as well. We've had, as always, thank you so much for people that come to our Twitter page. There's always some great banter on Twitter, Facebook as well. We're on Instagram and Pinterest, and we love to hear the stories. We love to hear the stories of people who've either want to publicly declare. So come to Twitter and Facebook if you want to publicly declare your goal, your dream, your goal for this next year, your dream in publishing, your writing goals, whatever it might be, however big or small you might think they are. Come and declare them publicly, because what we're finding is so many people are not just beating their goals, they're smashing them, they're doing them earlier than they expected. And from all those people who've got major publishing deals, announced book launches, sold lots of books as indie authors, it actually works. So join us on social media.
That's one rule I think we can agree definitely works. I mean, I've made public declarations, I've missed those declarations, but it's got me writing, it's got me doing stuff that I mean, this book I'm working on, these Woodville books, I was supposed to deliver those about a year ago, and I haven't because various things got in the way, but I'm still working on them. And I'm, if I hadn't made that declaration, I may never have started. So that one definitely works.
Excellent stuff. So what's been going on social media this week, Mark?
So I had a wonderful conversation with Patrick Mask, who is at Pat Mask, MARSKE1 on Twitter. He says, I've only recently started listening to your podcast and I'm working my way through from both ends. A lot of people do that. Isn't that strange? After hearing the brilliant and hilarious Ben Aronovich episode, I'm not sure I need to hear any more. I said, no, please keep listening, Patrick. Ben makes a couple of cameo appearances in later episodes. And Patrick says, it's inspired me to make this public declaration and work on turning what I have in the form of an opening scene, an outline, and in my head into a proper draft. And he's going for May 31st for completion of the first draft, ready to submit by August 31st. So best of luck with that, Patrick. Really hope Ben's bollocking inspires you the way that it inspired us as well.
Brilliant.
Jen Rowland, who is at Jen Rowland HDR, she says, here we are talking about writing every day. She says, following in the principles of the bestseller experiment today with AITC, which we all know stands for arse in the chair. Yes. But I need regular walking around breaks. And that's very true. That's something I've got as part of my routine because I'm so sedentary now, because I don't commute anymore.
Right.
I don't have that walk to work. I don't get to walk around London in my lunch break.
Huge difference.
So once I'm done in the morning, there's a cafe about 2 miles away, which is over some quite hilly countryside. So I make sure I go there and do my sort of admin and podcast stuff in the afternoon and then walk back again. Very good. That way I can walk about anywhere between 4 and 6 miles, depending on what route I take.
Yeah,
so,
I recommend that
really, really helps.
Every author get themselves something like a Fitbit just to see, like if you're doing it, once you do it full time, it's quite scary actually how you can rack up less than a few hundred steps during the day.
Oh God, yeah. If I don't go out, I walk less than a mile.
Self-care,
really
folks. Self-care,
really
very, very important.
Yeah.
If you want to keep writing books into your old age, then you need to also keep flexible. That's why I go to yoga 4 times a week. There you go. Public reveal there. Yeah. So probably an image most people want to get out of their head. But let's be honest, you've got to keep flexible because, I mean, I've heard of so many older authors, authors in their 60s and 70s, with chronic back problems. One of my favourite authors actually used to write lying down on his settee. And the settee wasn't particularly ergonomic, and he literally got to a point where he was almost crippled. So look after yourself. This has been a public health warning for the Bestseller experiment.
I know a couple of authors. I think Joe Abercrombie had one of those standing desks.
Oh yeah, somebody bought one on the retreat recently. Yeah, it was like a treadmill on the retreat. It was just, and it was really annoying because I just heard this all the way through, and I'm like, and then not just that, but he makes you feel really bad by the very fact that you're just sitting on on a chair writing, and he's there keeping fit. You think, oh bloody hell! Before you know it, we'll all be there. We'll be burning around on those little kind of scooter things. What are those called? Those one wheel things.
Oh, yeah. I'm in Herne Bay. They're all over the place.
Yeah,
here.
it was like an iPad. Brilliant. Mobile writers. Fantastic. Segways, thank you, Ian. They're called segways.
Yeah.
That's why we have the live
Oh,
audience.
well, those.
They are
right,
our
yeah.
brain. Fantastic.
I got a tweet from Jenny Keir. She says, I'm in a bath that smells of libraries. Now, she's got this candle, courtesy of her publisher, Avon Books, which is called The Scent of the Library. And she's in the bath listening to the Bestseller experiment. So, Jenny, if you're in the bath now, don't drop the candle in the water. But it did spark a debate, which is, what do libraries smell of? What would a candle that smells of libraries smell of?
Because if you think of it, old musty old libraries that have got 17th century books, not particularly aroma fantastic, but new book smell. I like that. You must be having a bit of that. Have you been sniffing your books? Have you been sniffing them?
Well, funnily enough, Panilla, when I first put that video up, Panilla Hughes messaged me and said, sniff it. So,
and you can fan the pages, so you kind of get that blast of new book up your nose. Sniff it, new book smell, very nice, quite addictive actually. I wonder if there's a clinician for that. New book smell addiction.
And then finally, following on, now this came just a little bit too late for our previous episode with the two of us. You remember Steve had that dream about us.
Never forget that.
Well, Steve Gowland.
The slide.
He replied... He said, just listen to the Bestseller experiment. Glad I've helped Mark stay with a new career as a writer caterer. Not so glad I've helped Mark DeVoe relive childhood traumas. #Wedgie. Cheese was involved in the dreams.
Cheese was involved, yes.
Threesomes entirely on Mr. D. Hilarious. Why I love the podcast. So
it was brilliant.
It's not the advice.
That to me,
it's the.
I know. That's my season 3 highlight so far. That's going to be hard to beat. Unless you've had your own dream about Bestseller experiment, in which case tell us on Twitter. That's brilliant. We live for these moments, don't we, Mark, really, and all the insanity that goes on behind the scenes. But fantastic stuff.
We do indeed.
So, any more social media you want to cover before we finish up?
No, that's it. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you how the very last Monster book is doing. How's it going? Because with us, it's all about pushing. You were going for a prize recently.
Yeah, we've entered. Well, we've managed to sneak in under the deadline to get the book to 2 national prizes. That, honestly, if we won those, would be huge for the book in terms of getting it out there on a wider scale. But there was a massive talk about bucket list that happened the other day. There was a store local to us in Nanaimo, if anyone's ever heard of Nanaimo bars. I live quite close to there. But there's a huge Canadian bookstore there called Chapters. They're quite well known, I think. You've probably heard of them. And it's the place that we always used to hang out. My wife loved reading books. She loved to write. And we would literally go there for family outings. And actually on one occasion, my littlest, who was quite young at the time, she was about 7, they actually have these baskets that you can wheel around. You get them in some supermarkets here as well. And she decided on her own, she disappeared off into the store and we lost her, but she's very independent. We weren't worried at all. Except when she came back, she'd actually put about $500 worth of books and items in her little bag. And she was like, "Can we go pay now, Daddy?" And I'm like, no. But anyway, so this store is it's been very close to my heart. It's quite nice going back in there, actually. And I'm not, obviously my wife's no longer with us, but it's one of those kind of spiritual places I go back and I feel her presence. But it was a favourite of a bookstore. And last week, I got the privilege of taking her book to the store, and they have actually displayed it on a shelf called Staff Picks. And I've got photographic evidence that I'm going to put up on the site for everyone to look at. So it was just one of those incredible moments where, a bit like we talked about earlier, Mark, where you kind of got the book for the first time in a box. There's also that moment where you actually get to see the book on the shelf next to some of your favourite authors. And I just want to thank Chapters firstly for doing that. It was on merit. They love the book. But I just think Jen would be dancing in heaven right now, looking down and seeing that book. I mean, the joke was, it was all about whether myself and my daughter, who's also a writer, who would be first to get into Chapters. And Jen snuck in under the radar without us even watching. So that's been a massive highlight for me. And I just want to encourage anyone who's ever thinking of writing a book, it's worth it just for that moment alone. It's worth it just to go into a bookshop and see your book on the shelf, or your wife's book, or whoever's book it is. It's such a wonderful celebration, and it's physical. So, yes, and thank you to everyone who's bought the book as well. If you want to get a copy, we have a few left. Lastmonsters.com is the children's book.
Wonderful stuff.
Excellent.
Wonderful stuff. Folks, if you want to get in touch, you can drop us a line. There's all sorts of ways to find us. We're at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact us page there. Come and join us on social media. Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram, we're at BestsellerXP. Please, if you've enjoyed the show, subscribe, rate and review on iTunes. And folks, if you're listening to this on the podcast and you're thinking, hey, how can I get to the live show? Well, just go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support, and there'll be more details there about how you can support us on Patreon and how you can get involved with the live shows. And also, you get involved with things like our one-page punch-ups. I'm going to announce the window for the next round of one-page punch-ups on Patreon very soon. So I'll be putting the dates on there over the next couple of days. Thank you to everyone who sent in their submissions for the first round. We were completely blown away by them. Really high standard of writing. Gave us tons to talk about. And I think the next round is going to be just as good, if not better. So thank you, folks.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, all of our supporters who joined us in the studio today. Thank you to Ian, Gareth, Stephanie, Craig, Mark, Richard, Jack, Sage, Logan, Dylan, Robin, Lorna, Richie, and everyone else. Sorry if I didn't mention your name. We thank you so much for joining us. You make the show, folks. Me and Mark just chatting to each other, it'd be pretty, it wouldn't be pretty exciting. But the fact that you're with us, it makes it live, it makes it real. You are our public declaration, ultimately. So thank you so much for supporting this show. We absolutely appreciate it. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It enables us to do what we love. And a little bit of writing in between as well, hey Mark? So it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
Occasionally. And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye, folks. Goodbye. See you soon. Take care.
"16 minutes of faffing about you folks. I hope you're getting
You're getting value for money.
yeah.
Dummy's guide to running a podcast, isn't it? Anyway,
Yeah. Why is it so complicated?